Architecture is a language.
And that's especially true of the classical orders, because these are what are essentially the building blocks of Western architecture, and they've been used for 2,500 years. This is the most fundamental, most basic, oldest kind of architectural system.
And that's what the Greeks were doing, but they were doing it in a much more sophisticated way.
Right, they developed decorative systems. Diagram, first the Doric, then the Ionic, and then the last two are Corinthian. These are just slight variations of these three orders. So let's start with the oldest order, the Doric order.
Right, and we think that this order began in the 7th century on the mainland in Greece.
The next area below the pediment is actually officially part of the order. And the top part of the entablature is called the frieze.
So a triglyph literally means 3 marks.
And then in between the triglyphs are spaces that are called metopes. And in ancient Greek architecture, these were often filled with sculpture.
And this is a Doric capital.
So the Doric is the oldest, the most severe, and was associated, according to the ancient Roman architectural historian Vitruvius, with masculine form.
Now, one of the other defining features of the Doric order is that at the bottom of the shaft, there is no decorative foot. The shaft of the column goes straight into the floor of the temple. Right, so this metope here would have actually fit right in one of these squares.
Let's talk about one last element that we find in Doric architecture, and that's something called entasis. And so when we look at an ancient Doric temple, we see that the shafts swell a little bit toward the center.
So right about a third of the way down, they would be at their widest. And it would taper ever so slightly towards the bottom and taper much more so as we move up to the top, so that the narrowest point of the column shaft would be right at the top, and the widest part would be about a third of the way from the base. One of the other things that entasis does is to emphasize the verticality of the temple.
And in fact, Vitruvius, the ancient Roman architectural historian, saw this as a more feminine order. It's taller, it's thinner.
What's important to remember is that the ancient Greeks, although they developed these 3 classical orders, were just the genesis. The Romans took these ideas over, and then, subsequently, people who've looked back to the classical tradition have borrowed from them yet again, and we still do this today.